The stone floor of the pack hall bit into Aurora's knees like frozen teeth, but she didn't dare shift her weight. Any movement, any sign of defiance, and the guards flanking her would force her face first into the ground again. The dried blood on her lip had cracked and reopened twice already tonight. Around her, the Windrider Pack's council sat in their carved wooden seats, their faces arranged in expressions of righteous disgust. She had healed half of them at some point, set Councilman Reeves's broken arm after a hunting accident, eased Elder Martha's arthritis through 3 harsh winters, delivered Councilwoman Petra's twins when the labor turned dangerous. Now they looked at her like she was something rotting they'd found in the forest. They know, Aurora thought, her wolf stirring weakly in her chest. They know I'm innocent. They have to know. But knowing and caring were different things, and the Windrider Pack had stopped caring about Aurora Valewood the moment she became inconvenient. The accused will state her name for the record, Alpha Hendricks intoned from his throne, his gray beard bristling with self-importance. Aurora lifted her chin, though the movement sent spots dancing across her vision. When had she last eaten a full meal? 3 days ago? 4? Aurora Valewood, pack healer for 7 years, falsely accused. A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd. Someone spat on the floor near her knee. You will speak only when questioned, Hendricks snapped, and you will not speak lies in this sacred hall. Lies. The word burned like acid in her throat. She had never lied, not once in all her years of service. She had given everything to this pack, her gifts, her time, her youth, her heart. And they had taken it all and demanded more. The great doors at the far end of the hall swung open, and Aurora's blood turned to ice. Nikolai Windrider strode in like he owned the room, which, as the Beta's son and the pack's golden warrior, he essentially did. His dark hair was swept back from his sharp-featured face, his broad shoulders encased in formal leathers, his ice-blue eyes fixed on Aurora with an expression of wounded betrayal so convincing that she might have believed it herself if she didn't know the truth. 6 months ago, those eyes had looked at her with passion, with promises, with the desperate hunger of the mate bond that had snapped into place between them on her 23rd birthday. And then he had shattered it all. I cannot look at her without feeling sick, Nikolai announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. To think that I once... He broke off, shaking his head as if overcome with emotion. I should have known. When she reacted so violently to my rejection of her advances, I should have seen the darkness in her heart. Rejection of her advances. Aurora's hands curled into fists against her thighs. He had rejected the bond, yes, but not because she had advanced on him, because his father had political plans that didn't include a lowly pack healer as a daughter-in-law. Because Luna Sarah had caught his eye with her noble blood and ambitious smile. Because Aurora, despite the sacred mate bond the moon goddess herself had forged between them, simply wasn't enough. She was jealous, Nikolai continued, warming to his performance, consumed by it. When I chose Sarah, when I announced our intention to petition for a bond override, Aurora became unstable. She threatened us both. I threatened no one, Aurora wanted to scream. I wept. I begged. I asked you how you could reject what the goddess gave us, and you laughed and said some gifts weren't worth keeping. But the words wouldn't come. Her throat had closed around them, and her wolf, her beautiful silver wolf who had once run through moonlit forests with such joy, was too weak, too starved, too beaten down to help her fight. And when Sarah became pregnant with my heir, Nikolai said, his voice dropping to a horrified whisper, Aurora saw her chance for revenge. Luna Sarah sat in the front row of observers, her delicate hand pressed to her flat stomach, her lovely face arranged in an expression of grief. She was a talented actress. Aurora had to give her that. 3 weeks ago, when Sarah had miscarried, she had screamed Aurora's name as the culprit before the blood had even finished staining the sheets. Never mind that Aurora had been locked in the healing hall at the time, treating a group of pups for fever. Never mind that Aurora hadn't been alone with Sarah in months. Never mind that the poison the pack's other healer had supposedly found in Sarah's system had never been properly identified or explained. Aurora was convenient. Aurora was already hated. Aurora was the perfect scapegoat. The evidence is clear, Alpha Hendricks said, shuffling the papers before him as if he hadn't made his decision hours before this farce of a trial began. Aurora Valewood did knowingly and maliciously poison Luna-designate Sarah with intent to murder the Beta's unborn heir. The Pack Council has considered appropriate punishment. Aurora's heart hammered against her ribs. Execution. They were going to execute her. They were going to. Death seems too merciful, Councilwoman Petra said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. The creature in her womb should not suffer for its mother's crimes. Aurora's hands flew to her stomach before she could stop them. The tiny flutter of life there, nearly 6 months along now, conceived in those last desperate nights before Nikolai had shattered their bond, was the only thing keeping her sane. The only thing keeping her alive. They knew. Of course they knew. A healer couldn't hide a pregnancy from other healers, and word traveled fast in a pack as insular as Windrider. The child is likely Nikolai's, Elder Marcus observed, as if discussing livestock rather than an unborn pup. From before the rejection, presumably. It would be wasteful to destroy potential Beta bloodline stock. Nikolai's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Aurora saw the flash of something dark in his eyes. Not grief for the pup he'd helped create, but calculation. She understood in that moment what he'd planned, what he'd always planned, and the realization nearly made her vomit on the stone floor. He wants the pup. He wants to take my child and raise it with Sarah, to pretend it was never mine, to erase me entirely. Then let nature take its course, Sarah said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was honey-sweet and poisoned underneath. Reduce her food. Keep her weak. Her healing gifts are tied to her physical strength. Everyone knows this. When she's too weak to sustain the pregnancy, she shrugged delicately. The goddess will have made the choice, not us. The council erupted in murmurs of approval. Merciful. Practical. Just. Aurora's vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. They were going to starve her. They were going to stand by and watch as her body consumed itself, as her pup fought for nutrients that weren't coming, as everything she was withered away to nothing. It is decided, Alpha Hendricks declared. Aurora Valewood is sentenced to indefinite imprisonment with restricted rations. She will be kept alive, but contained. Her pup's fate is in the goddess's hands. The goddess wouldn't do this, Aurora thought desperately, her wolf whimpering deep in her chest. The goddess wouldn't let them. But the goddess was silent, as she had been for months. And the guards were hauling Aurora to her feet, and Nikolai was turning away without a backward glance, and Sarah was smiling that small, satisfied smile, and everything Aurora had ever known was crumbling to ash around her. The cell they gave her had once been a root cellar. The walls were packed earth, the floor cold dirt. The only light a thin shaft that crept through a crack in the wooden door during daylight hours. Aurora had counted the days by that light. 17 so far, each one longer than the last. Her stomach had stopped growling on day 5. That had frightened her more than the hunger pangs, because she knew what it meant. Her body was giving up on expecting food. It was starting to eat itself instead. She pressed her hands to her belly, trying to feel the flutter of her pup's movement. It came less often now, once or twice a day, instead of the near-constant motion of the first week. Her pup was conserving energy. Her pup was learning already that the world was a place of scarcity and pain. "I'm sorry," Aurora whispered into the darkness. "I'm so sorry, little one. I tried. I tried to be good, to help people, to follow the rules. I thought if I was good enough, they would see." Her voice broke. She curled onto her side on the thin pallet they'd given her, her bones pressing painfully against the packed earth beneath. The mate bond is sacred, she had been taught since childhood. When the goddess connects two souls, nothing should sever them. but Nikolai had severed theirs with a single sentence. I, Nikolai Windrider, reject you, Aurora Valewood, as my mate and Luna. The pain had been— Aurora shuddered even now, remembering, like being torn in half, like having her heart ripped from her chest and crushed while she watched. She had collapsed on the floor of his quarters, screaming, and he had stepped over her body to leave for his dinner with Sarah's family. She had survived somehow. Her wolf had gone quiet, retreating deep inside her, wounded nearly to death, but clinging to life by the thinnest thread. Aurora had returned to her duties as pack healer, pretending she was whole when she was nothing but shattered glass held together by habit and obligation. And then Sarah had lost her pup, and Aurora had become the perfect target for everyone's grief. The door to her cell scraped open. Aurora flinched, curling tighter into herself, expecting the guard who sometimes came to kick at her palate or call her names. The pack's cruelty had been creative these past weeks, but the figure that ducked through the low doorway wasn't a guard. "Goddess above," breathed Elder Martha, the oldest member of the council. Her weathered face went pale as she took in Aurora's condition, the hollow cheeks, the visible ribs beneath her thin shift, the dry and cracking lips. "Aurora, child, what have they done to you?" Aurora couldn't speak. Her throat was too dry, and hope was a dangerous thing to feel. Martha crossed the small space and knelt beside the pallet, pressing a water skin to Aurora's lips. "Drink. Slowly, that's it." The water was the sweetest thing Aurora had ever tasted. She forced herself to take small sips, knowing that too much too fast would make her sick. "I voted against this," Martha said quietly, her gnarled hands gentle on Aurora's hair. "I want you to know that. I remembered. The twins you delivered for my great-granddaughter, how you sat with her through 17 hours of labor, how you kept her alive when she started bleeding. I remembered all of it. But I was alone, child. One voice against many." "Why?" Aurora's voice came out as a croak. "Why are you here?" Martha's expression flickered with something that might have been shame. "There's a territorial dispute at the eastern border. King Tobias Ashford himself has come to mediate. His kingdom has interests in the outcome. The whole pack is assembled in the outer clearing for the hearing." Aurora didn't understand. What did a border dispute have to do with her slow death in a root cellar? "I'm old," Martha continued, pressing a small bundle into Aurora's hands. "Bread, dried meat, a precious apple. I've lived long enough to see patterns repeat. And I've seen the way Nikolai looks at your belly when he thinks no one is watching." Aurora's blood turned to ice. He wants your pup alive, and you dead. The perfect solution. His bloodline continues. His inconvenient true mate disappears, and Sarah never has to know that her replacement children will be second in the succession after the pup she thinks she'll claim as her own. The cell seemed to spin around Aurora. She had suspected, but hearing it confirmed. "The border hearing," Martha said urgently. "The whole pack will be there. Guards, council, everyone. If you could get out of the compound, reach the disputed territory, throw yourself on King Ashford's mercy—" "I can barely walk," Aurora whispered. "I know." Martha's eyes were wet. "I know, child. But if you stay here, you die. Your pup dies. And Nikolai wins." She pressed something cold into Aurora's palm. A key. "The back gate. In 1 hour, when the hearing is at its most heated. It's all I can offer." Aurora stared at the key. It was heavy in her hand, heavy with impossibility. She hadn't stood in 3 days. Her wolf was dormant, barely breathing. The eastern border was miles away through territory she didn't know, but her pup fluttered against her palm, weak but present, still fighting. "Thank you," Aurora breathed. Martha kissed her forehead and slipped away, leaving the water skin and food behind. Aurora ate slowly, methodically, forcing each bite down through her shrunken stomach protested. She would need every scrap of strength. An hour. She had an hour to rest, to prepare, to gather what remained of her courage. And then she would run, or die trying. The compound gate was heavier than Aurora remembered. Her arms shook with the effort of pulling it open just wide enough to slip through. Every muscle in her body screamed for rest, but she couldn't stop. The distant sound of raised voices from the eastern clearing meant the hearing was in full swing. She had minutes at most before someone noticed the empty cell. The forest swallowed her in cold shadow. Aurora had grown up in these woods, had learned every healing herb and poisonous plant that grew beneath their ancient trees. But the forest felt alien now, hostile, watching, waiting for her to falter. Her bare feet stumbled over roots she should have seen. Her breath came in harsh gasps that echoed too loudly in the stillness. East, she told herself. Just keep moving east. She didn't know how long she walked. The sun crept across the sky, hidden by the canopy but marking time in the shifting patterns of light through the leaves. Her pup was quiet, too quiet, and Aurora pressed her hand to her belly with every few steps, desperate to feel that tiny flutter of life. Please, she prayed to the goddess who had abandoned her. Please, let my baby survive. I don't care what happens to me. Just let my pup live. The sound of voices made her freeze. She was close to the border now. She could smell the marker trees, the territorial scent lines that divided Windrider lands from the neutral zone. And somewhere ahead, the hearing was taking place. Aurora crept forward on silent feet, every healer's instinct screaming at her to turn back, to hide, to not draw attention to herself in her weakened state. But she needed to reach the king's people. She needed to find someone who might listen, who might grant her sanctuary. Her foot caught on a hidden root. Aurora crashed forward with a cry she couldn't suppress, her palms scraping open on rough bark, her vision graying at the edges. She lay where she fell, gasping, unable to summon the strength to rise. Get up, she ordered herself. Get up, get up. You have to. A shadow fell over her. What in the name of the moon? Aurora looked up, and up, into the face of a man who seemed to have been carved from the forest itself. He was enormous, taller than Nikolai, broader than any wolf she'd ever seen, with features that might have been handsome if they weren't arranged in an expression of absolute shock. His hair was dark as midnight, his jaws sharp enough to cut, and his eyes burned golden amber as they met hers. Something in Aurora's chest cracked open. A flood of heat poured through her, molten and consuming, and for one impossible moment her wolf, her beaten, starving, half-dead wolf, surged to the surface with a howl of desperate recognition. "Mate!" her wolf screamed. "Mate!" The stranger inhaled sharply, his powerful frame going rigid, a low growl rumbling from somewhere deep in his chest. Aurora watched his pupils dilate, watched his hands curl into fists at his sides, watched raw, primal need transform his shocked expression into something hungry and ancient and claiming. "Who?" he breathed, and his voice was gravel and honey and command all at once. "Did this to you?" Aurora opened her mouth to answer, and the world went dark. Aurora woke to warmth. The sensation was so foreign, so utterly unexpected, that for a long moment she simply lay still, trying to understand what had changed. She was no longer on the cold forest floor, soft fabric pressed against her cheek. Wool, she thought distantly, finely woven and scented with cedar. Her body rested on something that yielded beneath her weight, cradling her aching bones instead of grinding against them. A bed. She was in a bed. Memory crashed back in fragments. The root cellar, Martha's kindness, the desperate flight through the forest, and then... mate. Aurora's eyes flew open. Canvas walls surrounded her, their pale surface glowing amber with firelight from somewhere beyond. Military tent, her healer's mind supplied automatically. Large, well-appointed, designed for someone important. Rugs covered the ground beneath the bed, muffling sound and holding warmth. A brazier crackled softly in the corner, filling the space with gentle heat. And there, sitting in a carved wooden chair beside her bed, was the man from the forest. He was watching her with those impossible golden eyes, his massive frame held unnaturally still, like a predator trying not to startle its prey. Up close, he was even more overwhelming than her fractured memories suggested. His shoulders seemed broad enough to block out the world, his jaw shadowed with dark stubble, his hands, resting on his knees, large enough to span her entire waist. Those hands could crush her, Aurora thought distantly. Those hands could break her in half without effort, but they had carried her here instead. "You're awake," he said, and his voice rolled through her like distant thunder, like the first rumble of a summer storm. Something in her chest responded to that voice, pulling toward him even as her mind screamed caution. "My healer said you might sleep for days. You've been out for 6 hours." Aurora tried to speak, and produced only a dry rasp. Immediately he was moving, rising from his chair with fluid grace, pouring water from a pitcher on the side table, crossing to her bedside. He held the cup to her lips with a gentleness that seemed impossible for someone his size. "Slowly," he murmured, "small sips." The same words Martha had used. But where Martha's kindness had felt like a farewell gift, this man's care felt like a promise. Aurora drank, feeling the cool water trace a path of relief down her raw throat. "Where?" She had to stop, swallow, try again. "Where am I?" "My war tent. You collapsed in the disputed territory, which means you're under royal jurisdiction now." A flicker of something dark crossed his features. "Lucky for you. If you'd fallen 100 yards to the west, you'd still be under Windrider authority." Windrider. The pack that had starved her. The pack that wanted her dead. Aurora's hand flew to her stomach, panic surging through her weakened body. Her pup. She couldn't feel her pup. "The child lives," the man said quickly, and the tension in his voice made her look up at him sharply. "My healer examined you thoroughly. The pregnancy is stressed but viable. You need food and rest. But the pup is fighting." Relief crashed through Aurora so intensely that tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. She turned her face away, humiliated by the display of weakness, but she couldn't seem to control it. Her body was shaking with suppressed sobs. "Don't," the man said roughly. "Don't hide from me. You have nothing to be ashamed of." "I'm crying in front of a stranger," Aurora managed. "I'd say that's something." "Not a stranger." He moved closer, and the air between them seemed to thicken, to grow heavy with something Aurora didn't understand. "Never a stranger. Not to you." She looked at him then, really looked, and felt it again. That pull, that impossible, undeniable call that resonated in the deepest part of her soul, in the place where her wolf had been sleeping for so long. Her wolf stirred. It was the barest flutter of consciousness, weaker than it had been before Nikolai shattered their bond, but it was there. After months of silence, a feeling like half of herself had been carved away, Aurora's wolf was waking up. And it was straining toward this man with desperate, primal certainty. "Mate," her wolf whispered. "Real mate. True mate. Ours." "No," Aurora breathed. And she wasn't sure if she was denying the man before her, or the impossible truth her wolf was howling. "No, I had a mate. He rejected me. The bond broke. I can't." "Your former mate was a fool and a coward." The man's voice had dropped to a low growl, something feral flickering in those amber depths. "A rejection doesn't change what the goddess destined. It just delays it. Creates space for the true match to emerge." Aurora stared at him. "Who are you?" "Tobias Ashford." He said it simply, without arrogance, but Aurora's blood ran cold. "King of the Eastern Territories, Alpha of the Shadow Peak Pack. And, if I'm not mistaken..." He leaned closer, and heat flooded through her, pooling in her chest like swallowed sunlight. "Your mate. The king." She had collapsed at the feet of the Alpha King himself. "I'm no one," Aurora said, and her voice cracked on the words. "I'm a disgraced healer, accused of murder, carrying another man's pup. I'm nothing. I'm less than nothing. You're mine. The word hit her like a physical force. Aurora felt it resonate through her bones, felt her wolf howl in response, felt every cell in her body light up with recognition. Tobias's eyes had gone fully golden now, molten amber burning in the dim firelight, and a growl was building in his chest that made her shiver with something that wasn't quite fear. I felt it the moment I saw you, he continued, his voice rough with restrained intensity. You were lying in the dirt, half dead, and my wolf nearly tore out of my skin to reach you. Do you understand what that means? I've waited 32 years for my mate. I'd given up. Thought the goddess had passed me over, that I was meant to rule alone. And then there you were, broken and beautiful and mine, and everything I thought I knew about my future changed in a single heartbeat. He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his features. I won't pretend I didn't hesitate. For one terrible moment, I wondered if the goddess was testing me, if this was some cruel trick. A mate who carried another male's child, who came to me half dead and fleeing accusations of murder. My advisors would call it political suicide, and for that one moment, I almost walked away. His jaw tightened with self-disgust. It's the closest I've ever come to true cowardice. Aurora couldn't breathe. The air was too thick, too charged with something that felt like lightning about to strike. She was aware of Tobias's proximity with excruciating precision, the heat radiating from his imposing frame, the pine and smoke scent of him that made her wolf whimper with longing, the way his hands trembled slightly at his sides, as if he was fighting the urge to touch her. What if I don't want this? She whispered. What if I can't? What if I'm too broken? Tobias moved then, reaching out with aching slowness to cup her face in his palm. The contact sent electricity cascading through Aurora's body, warmth spreading from the point where his skin met hers. Her wolf surged toward the surface with a force that left her gasping. Then I wait, he said simply. I wait until you're whole. I wait until you're ready. I wait until you choose me freely, with full knowledge of what I am and what I offer. His thumb traced her cheekbone, and his voice dropped to something almost reverent. But I need you to know, Aurora Valewood, I will spend the rest of my life proving that I am nothing like the man who hurt you, if you give me that chance. Their eyes locked. Golden amber meeting sea green, two wolves recognizing each other across the vast distance of strangers. Aurora felt the bond settling into place between them like a key, sliding into a lock, like the first breath after breaking the surface of deep water. She was terrified. She was starving and pregnant and accused of murder and far too damaged to trust anyone ever again. But for the first time in months, she didn't feel alone. Why? She asked, and her voice was barely audible. Why would you want someone like me? Tobias's expression shifted, tenderness mixing with that fierce, protective hunger that seemed to be his default around her. Because the goddess chose you for me. Because my wolf knows yours like it knows its own heartbeat. Because... He broke off, something raw flickering across his features. Because the first thing you did when you woke up was reach for your belly to make sure your pup was safe. Because even after everything they did to you, your first instinct was to protect the innocent life in your keeping. Aurora's breath caught. That, Tobias said quietly, is the heart of a queen. Whether you ever claim the title or not. The food arrived an hour later, carried by a procession of servants who seemed slightly terrified of their king, but treated Aurora with careful respect. They set up a low table beside her bed, covering it with more dishes than she had seen in one place in her entire life. Roasted venison, still steaming, the meat so tender it fell apart at the touch of a fork. Fresh bread, 3 kinds, braided and golden and fragrant with yeast. A bowl of honeyed fruit glistening in the firelight. Cheese, soft and sharp in alternating wedges. A pot of soup, rich with vegetables and herbs that Aurora's healer's nose identified instantly. Bone broth, fortified with iron-rich greens, exactly what a malnourished pregnant woman needed. Someone had designed this meal for her specifically. Someone had thought about what her body required and provided it without asking. I can't eat all of this, Aurora said weakly, staring at the bounty before her. Tobias had pulled his chair closer to her bedside, and now he leaned back in it with his arms crossed over his broad chest. Eat what you can. The rest will be covered and kept warm for when you're hungry again. But the table never empties for my Luna. The words hit Aurora like a physical blow. She looked at him sharply, searching for mockery or manipulation, but his expression was entirely sincere. He meant it. He meant every word. I'm not your Luna, she said, but her voice wavered. Not yet. Tobias's lips curved in a small smile. Eat, Aurora. She ate. The first bite of venison made her eyes close involuntarily, pleasure rolling through her as the rich flavor coated her tongue. She'd forgotten. She'd forgotten what it felt like to taste something beyond scraps and stale bread, what it felt like to have her body recognize real nourishment. Tobias watched her eat without speaking. He didn't rush her or comment on how quickly she was emptying the plates. He simply refilled her cup when it was low and moved dishes closer when she reached for them, a silent guardian ensuring that nothing interrupted her meal. When the tears came, she didn't try to hide them this time. They slid down her cheeks silently as she chewed and swallowed, grief and relief and overwhelming gratitude tangling together in her chest until she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. The kindness of it, the simple, profound kindness of being fed without condition or cruelty, was almost more than she could bear. In my pack, Tobias said quietly, no one goes hungry. It's the first law I established when I took the throne. Before politics, before territory, before alliances, food. Every member of Shadow Peak knows they will be fed, regardless of their status or their worth in the eyes of others. Aurora swallowed hard. Your pack must love you. My pack knows I will die before I let them suffer. He paused, something dark crossing his expression. When I saw you collapse in that forest, when my healer told me what had been done to you, the deliberate starvation, the conditions of your confinement, I wanted to burn the Windrider compound to the ground and salt the earth where it stood. You didn't. Not yet. The words were soft, but the threat beneath them was unmistakable. The territorial dispute is still being mediated. I've suspended negotiations until you're well enough to tell me your story. But know this, Aurora, there will be a reckoning. What they did to you, what they plan to do to your pup, those crimes will not go unanswered. Aurora's hands had stilled over her plate. Why do you care? You just met me. I could be everything they say I am. A murderer, a traitor, a jealous former lover who poisoned an innocent pregnant woman. Tobias leaned forward, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. Are you? No, she whispered. I'm not. I would never. I'm a healer. I've dedicated my entire life to saving people, to helping them. I didn't poison Sarah. I didn't even know she was pregnant until she announced it at the feast. I was locked in the healing hall treating sick pups when the miscarriage happened. But no one would listen. I'm listening. The simple statement broke something in Aurora's chest. She found herself telling him everything. The mate bond with Nikolai that had felt like salvation after years of loneliness, the rejection that had nearly destroyed her, the pregnancy she'd hidden as long as she could, the accusation and the trial and the sentence that was designed to kill her slowly while keeping her pack's hands technically clean. Through it all, Tobias listened. His expression grew steadily darker, his hands curling into fists on his knees, but he didn't interrupt. He let her speak until the words ran dry and she was left hollow and trembling on the bed. And Martha? He asked when she finished. The elder who helped you escape? She's the only one who tried to help me. Aurora's voice cracked. If they find out what she did, I'll send word that she's under my protection, Tobias said immediately. If Windrider touches her, it's an act of war against my kingdom. Aurora stared at him. You would do that? For a woman you've never met? Just because she helped me? I would do considerably more than that for someone who showed kindness to my mate. Tobias rose from his chair, and Aurora was reminded again of just how large he was. A mountain of a man, powerful enough to command armies, but gentle enough to hand-feed water to a starving stranger. Rest now. Eat when you wake. My healer will check on you regularly, and I've stationed guards outside your tent. For your protection, not your imprisonment. You're free to move about the camp when you feel strong enough. But I'd advise against going too far. Windrider territory begins just beyond the neutral zone. He moved toward the tent flap, and Aurora felt a surge of inexplicable panic at his departure. She tamped it down ruthlessly. She was not going to become dependent on this man, no matter what her wolf whispered about mates and destiny. But at the entrance, Tobias paused. He looked back at her over his shoulder, and his expression was so raw, so vulnerable, that it stole her breath. "When I was a boy," he said quietly, "my mother told me I would know my true mate by the way my wolf reacted. She said it would feel like coming home after a long journey, like finding the missing piece of your soul and realizing you'd been incomplete your whole life." He paused, and his voice dropped to something almost fragile. "I felt that, Aurora, the moment I saw you. I know you're scared and hurt and carrying another man's pup, and I know you have every reason to distrust anyone who claims to care about you. But I need you to know, I've waited my whole life for you, and I'm not going anywhere." He slipped through the tent flap before she could respond, leaving Aurora alone with the remnants of her meal and the impossible, terrifying warmth blooming in her chest. 3 days passed. Aurora ate. She slept. She let Tobias's healer, a kind-faced woman named Elena, who clucked over her malnourishment and brewed strengthening teas without comment, examine her and her pup with gentle thoroughness. The baby was recovering well, Elena reported. Strong heartbeat, good movement. Aurora wept with relief and pretended she wasn't. Tobias visited twice daily, once in the morning and once in the evening. He never touched her without permission. He never pressured her to talk about the bond that hummed between them like a plucked harp string. He simply sat with her, asking about her life before Windrider, about her training as a healer, about the herbs she preferred and the treatments she'd developed. He was courting her, Aurora realized on the 3rd evening, courting her with food and conversation and careful respect, courting her as if she were a valuable ally rather than a damaged refugee. She didn't know what to do with that. On the 4th day, she felt strong enough to leave her bed. The camp sprawled across a clearing in the neutral zone, a temporary city of tents and cook fires and wolves in human form going about the business of military occupation. Aurora had borrowed clothes from Elena, a simple woolen dress and sturdy boots, and she walked slowly between the tents, relearning the sensation of solid ground beneath her feet. She was aware of the stairs. Word had clearly spread about the mysterious woman the king had claimed as his mate, the pregnant stranger he'd rescued from the forest. Some of the looks were curious. Others were calculating. A few were openly hostile. Wolves who resented an outsider suddenly elevated to potential queen. Aurora ignored them all. Her healer's eyes were cataloging the camp layout, noting the positioning of the medical tent, identifying the soldiers who were nursing minor injuries they hadn't bothered to report. Old habits died hard. She was examining a patch of wild comfrey growing near the edge of camp, useful for healing broken bones, if properly prepared, when a voice behind her made her freeze. Well, the pack's little murderer, enjoying royal hospitality. Aurora turned slowly. The woman who stood before her was beautiful in the way of predators, sleek and deadly and utterly without warmth. She wore the formal colors of the Windrider diplomatic party, and her smile was sharp enough to cut. "Councilwoman Petra," Aurora said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm surprised the pack sent you as an emissary. Someone had to come retrieve our property." Petra's eyes swept over Aurora dismissively. "Though I see you've been spreading your legs for a new protector. How convenient that you collapsed right at the king's feet." I was fleeing the sentence your council imposed on me. Aurora's hands curled into fists. The sentence that was designed to kill my unborn pup. The pup you conceived by seducing the beta's son, mere weeks before his wedding to a woman of actual worth? Petra laughed, high and cruel. Please, we all know what you are, Aurora, a social climber who couldn't accept rejection gracefully. The king may be fooled by your pitiful act, but the rest of us see the truth. Aurora felt her wolf stirring, weak but angry. The truth is that I was falsely accused, illegally sentenced, and nearly starved to death while carrying an innocent child. The truth is that your pack violated every law of human decency. What's going on here? The voice cut through the air like a blade, and both women turned to find Tobias striding toward them. His expression was thunderous, his gaze blazing with barely contained fury. Your Majesty. Petra dropped into an elaborate curtsy, all trace of her cruelty vanishing beneath a mask of diplomatic sweetness. I was simply welcoming our former pack member to your encampment, expressing my concern for her well-being during this difficult time. Tobias didn't even look at her. His attention was fixed on Aurora, cataloging the tension in her shoulders, the pallor of her cheeks. Aurora, are you all right? I'm fine, Aurora said automatically, then hesitated. I heard enough. Tobias turned to Petra, and the temperature in the clearing seemed to drop by several degrees. You will not speak to Aurora again. You will not approach her. You will not so much as look in her direction without my explicit permission. Is that understood? Petra's smile flickered. Your Majesty, I'm not sure. Is that understood? It wasn't a question. It was a command, issued by an alpha king who could crush the Windrider pack under his boot heel without breaking a sweat. Aurora watched Petra's face go pale, watched her bow her head in submission. Yes, Your Majesty, of course. Return to your delegation's quarters. I'll speak with Alpha Hendrix about your conduct personally. Petra retreated, but not before shooting Aurora a venomous glare that promised retribution. Aurora watched her go, her heart hammering against her ribs. I'm sorry, she said when Petra was out of earshot. I shouldn't have engaged with her. I should have just walked away. No. Tobias moved closer, and Aurora was suddenly aware of how near he was, how the warmth of him seemed to wrap around her like a physical embrace. You have nothing to apologize for. That woman insulted my mate in my own camp. The fault is hers, not yours. She called me a murderer. She called you a social climber who seduced the beta's son. Tobias's voice was hard, which is a creative interpretation of the mate bond the goddess herself forged between you and Nikolai. Aurora blinked. How do you know about? I've been investigating. His expression softened slightly. I told you there would be a reckoning, Aurora. Did you think I was speaking idly? She didn't know what to say. The idea of someone fighting for her, of someone caring enough to investigate, to gather evidence, to prepare a case on her behalf, was so foreign that she couldn't quite grasp it. Come, Tobias said, offering her his arm with old-fashioned courtesy. You've been on your feet too long. Let me escort you back to your tent. Aurora hesitated for only a moment before slipping her hand into the crook of his elbow. The contact sent warmth flooding through her, and she felt her wolf purr with contentment. Maybe, she thought as they walked through the camp, maybe this could be real. Maybe he really is different. The bond between them hummed with quiet promise, and for the first time since Nikolai's rejection, Aurora allowed herself to imagine a future that didn't end in darkness. That evening, Tobias came to her tent with news. Nikolai Windrider has requested diplomatic immunity to enter my camp, he said without preamble, and Aurora's blood turned to ice. He claims you stole pack secrets when you fled, and he's demanding your return to face justice. Aurora's hand flew to her belly, cradling the small swell where her pup was growing stronger by the day. No, you can't. Please. Aurora. Tobias crossed to her in 2 strides, taking her hands in his. His grip was warm and steady, anchoring her to the present. Listen to me. I am not handing you over to anyone. You are under my protection. You are my mate, even if we haven't formalized the bond. Nothing he says will change that. But if he has diplomatic immunity, then he can make his accusations publicly and you can answer them publicly. Tobias's eyes blazed. You told me you're innocent. Now is your chance to prove it. Aurora's breath caught. You'd let me face him? Speak in my own defense? I would insist on it. His thumbs traced circles on the backs of her hands. You are not the voiceless victim they tried to make you. You are a healer with 7 years of service. You are a woman who survived months of deliberate cruelty. And you are my mate, destined by the goddess herself. It's time Nikolai Windrider and his pack saw exactly who they threw away. Aurora looked into his warm amber gaze, this king who had fed her and protected her and fought for her honor before he even knew her story, and felt something shift in her chest. The last crumbling wall around her heart began to give way. What if I fail? She whispered. What if he's more convincing than I am? What if they believe him? Tobias leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. Then I burn the Windrider compound to the ground anyway, and we figure out what comes next together. But you won't fail, Aurora. You have something Nikolai has never possessed and never will. What's that? The truth. His voice dropped to something intimate, something meant only for her. And me. You have me. Aurora's wolf surged toward him with desperate longing, and this time she didn't fight it. She rose onto her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, a question rather than a claim. But Tobias responded with a groan that seemed to come from somewhere primal, his hand sliding into her hair as he tilted her head back and deepened the contact. Aurora felt the mate bond flare between them, felt heat and want, and something that might have been love cascade through her veins. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. Tomorrow, Tobias said roughly. Tomorrow, Nikolai makes his accusations. Tomorrow, you answer them. And then we begin the rest of our lives. Aurora nodded, her lips still tingling from his kiss. Tomorrow, she would face her past. But tonight, for the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe in her future. Aurora woke before dawn, her body tense with anticipation and dread. The kiss from the night before still lingered on her lips like a promise, but the morning brought the cold reality of what she would face. Nikolai was here, in this camp, breathing the same air, walking the same ground, preparing to destroy her all over again. She pressed her hand to her belly, feeling the gentle flutter of movement that had become her anchor. Her pup was awake too, perhaps sensing her mother's turmoil. Aurora closed her eyes and focused on that tiny life, drawing strength from its persistence. They had survived starvation together. They had survived rejection and cruelty, and the long journey to this place. They would survive, Nikolai Windrider. A soft knock at the tent entrance made her heart leap, but it was only Martha, carrying a tray laden with food. The older woman had arrived at the camp 2 days after Aurora, having fled Windrider territory when word spread of Aurora's escape. Tobias had granted her asylum without hesitation. Now her face was set in grim lines as she placed the breakfast before Aurora. You need to eat, Martha said firmly. All of it. You'll need your strength today. Aurora looked at the spread before her. Warm porridge with honey, fresh bread with butter, sliced apples and cheese, a cup of rich milk. Her stomach twisted with nerves, but she forced herself to take a bite of bread. The taste was ash on her tongue. I saw him, Martha said quietly, settling onto the edge of the cot. Nikolai. He arrived at first light with 3 of his father's warriors. Aurora's hand trembled and she set down the bread. What did he look like? Confident. Smug. Martha's voice dripped with contempt. He walked into this camp like he already owned it, demanding an audience with the king. His Majesty refused to see him until the formal tribunal this afternoon. This afternoon? Aurora had hoped for more time. Hours at least, to prepare herself, to steel her nerves. The king wants this resolved quickly, he said. Martha hesitated, then continued. He said he won't have that snake poisoning his court with lies for any longer than necessary. Aurora felt a flutter of warmth beneath the fear. Tobias believed her. Even now, even with Nikolai here making accusations, Tobias believed her. There's something else, Martha said, her voice dropping even lower. Something you should know before you face him. Aurora looked up, catching the troubled expression on the healer's face. What is it? The accusations Nikolai is making, they're not just about the poisoning. Martha's hands twisted in her lap. He's claiming you seduced him, that you deliberately conceived his child to trap him into acknowledging your bond. He's saying you threatened Luna Sarah when she discovered the affair, that the poisoning was meant for her all along, and the miscarriage was simply collateral damage. The words hit Aurora like physical blows. She pressed her hand harder against her belly, feeling her pup squirm as if in protest. None of that is true. He came to me. He pursued me for months before I gave in. And I never even knew about his relationship with Sarah until... I know. Martha reached out and covered Aurora's hand with her own. I know, child. But you need to understand what you're walking into. Nikolai has had months to craft his story, to make himself the victim. He's clever, and he's desperate, and desperate men are dangerous. Aurora thought of the male she had once loved, his easy smile, his gentle hands, the way he'd whispered promises in the dark. She had believed every word. She had given him everything, her body and her heart and her future, and he had thrown it all away the moment it became inconvenient. Why is he really here? Aurora asked, though she already suspected the answer. He doesn't want me back. He never wanted me at all. So why go through all this trouble? Martha's expression darkened. Power. His father is aging and the succession isn't secure. Nikolai needs to prove himself, to show he can handle threats to the pack. Bringing you back in chains, executing you for treason, it would cement his position as the next alpha. And my pup? The silence that followed was answer enough. Aurora felt her wolf rise within her, not with fear this time, but with a mother's primal rage. They wanted her child dead. They had always wanted her child dead. The starvation, the cruelty, the calculated deprivation, it had never been punishment. It had been murder by inches. I won't let them, Aurora said, and her voice sounded strange to her own ears. Stronger, harder. I won't let them touch my pup. You won't have to. Martha squeezed her hand. The king has made his position clear. But you need to be smart about this, Aurora. You need to think like a queen, not a victim. Nikolai expects you to cower and weep and beg for mercy. Don't give him what he expects. Aurora nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. She had spent so long being small, making herself invisible, trying not to attract attention or anger. But that Aurora, the broken, starving shadow of a woman, was gone. The Aurora who sat here now, with a king's protection and a pup in her belly, and a mate bond thrumming with potential, was someone else entirely. Help me dress, Aurora said, pushing aside the breakfast tray and rising to her feet. If I'm going to face my past, I want to look like I've already won. Martha smiled, the first real smile Aurora had seen from her since news of Nikolai's arrival. Now that sounds like a Luna. The morning passed in a blur of preparation. Martha helped Aurora into a gown of deep blue velvet that had appeared in her tent sometime during the night. Another gift from Tobias, though he hadn't signed the accompanying note. The fabric was soft against her skin, and the cut was elegant without being ostentatious. It emphasized the gentle swell of her belly rather than hiding it, a deliberate choice that Aurora appreciated. She would not be ashamed of her child. She would never be ashamed again. A young woman arrived to arrange Aurora's hair, weaving it into an intricate style that left her neck bare. Aurora caught Martha's knowing look and felt heat rise to her cheeks. The exposed neck was a message, a declaration of availability for marking. Whether Tobias had requested it or whether the servants had assumed, Aurora couldn't say. But she didn't ask them to change it. When she finally emerged from her tent, the sun was high overhead and the camp was buzzing with activity. Word of the tribunal had spread, and it seemed every soldier and servant in Tobias's army had found a reason to be near the main pavilion. Aurora felt their eyes on her as she walked, felt the weight of their curiosity and judgment. But she also felt something else: admiration, respect. These people had seen her at her lowest, had witnessed her collapse and her recovery. They knew what the Windrider pack had done to her, and they were watching to see what she would do next. Aurora lifted her chin and walked taller. The tribunal was being held in the largest tent in the camp, a massive structure of canvas and wood that served as Tobias's throne room when he was in the field. Aurora had never been inside, and she paused at the entrance to take in the scene before her. The space was arranged like a court of law, with rows of benches for witnesses and observers, a raised platform at the far end where Tobias sat on a simple wooden throne. His crown was on his head today, a circlet of hammered gold that caught the light filtering through the canvas. His expression was carved from stone, giving nothing away. To his left stood his advisors, their expressions carefully neutral. To his right stood his personal guard, 6 towering warriors in full armor. And in the center of the room, standing before the throne with an arrogance that made Aurora's blood boil, was Nikolai. He had changed since she'd last seen him. His dark hair was longer, swept back from a face that seemed harder, colder than she remembered. He wore the formal attire of the Windrider pack, leather and fur and silver accents, and he stood with the easy confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. When Aurora entered, his head turned. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and she felt something twist in her gut. Not longing, not anymore. Just the echo of a wound that had never properly healed. Nikolai smiled. It was the same smile he'd worn when he'd told her he loved her, when he'd whispered promises of forever against her skin. The same smile he'd worn when he'd stood before the pack council and called her a murderer. Aurora. His voice carried across the room, warm and intimate, and designed to suggest a connection that no longer existed. You're looking well. Better than I expected, given the circumstances. Aurora felt Tobias's gaze on her, felt the mate bond pulse with something that might have been jealousy or protectiveness, or both. She drew strength from it as she walked down the center aisle, her head high, her steps steady. I have been well cared for, she replied, and her voice didn't waver. The king's hospitality has been generous. Something flickered in Nikolai's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or annoyance. He had expected her to be frightened, to stumble over her words, to make his job easier. Aurora felt a savage satisfaction in disappointing him. Let us begin. Tobias's voice cut through the murmuring of the crowd, commanding instant silence. Nikolai Windrider, you have requested this tribunal to present accusations against Aurora Valewood, formerly of your pack. You have been granted diplomatic immunity to speak freely, but be warned, my patience is not infinite, and my tolerance for falsehood is non-existent. Choose your words carefully. Nikolai inclined his head in what might have been respect, though Aurora doubted he felt any. Your Majesty, I thank you for the opportunity to address this matter. I come not as an enemy, but as a concerned party seeking justice for my pack. Then speak your piece. Nikolai turned to face the assembled crowd, playing to his audience with practiced ease. 6 months ago, Aurora Valewood was accused of poisoning my pack's Luna, causing the death of an unborn heir. The evidence was compelling. She had access to the Luna's quarters, she had knowledge of poisons through her healing work, and she had motive. He paused, letting the words sink in, before continuing. You see, Aurora and I were involved. A youthful indiscretion, a moment of weakness on my part. When I attempted to end the relationship, she became unstable, Jealous. She threatened to expose our affair unless I acknowledged her as my true mate, which I could not do without destroying the alliance my family had built with the Luna's bloodline. Aurora listened to the lies spill from his lips like honey, each word a knife in her back. She wanted to scream, to interrupt, to tell the truth. But Martha's words echoed in her mind. Think like a queen, not a victim. So she stood silent, her face a mask, and let him dig his own grave. When Luna Sarah discovered Aurora's pregnancy, Nikolai continued, his voice taking on a tone of tragic regret. She confronted her. There was an argument, and shortly after, the Luna fell ill. We had no choice but to conclude that Aurora, in a fit of jealous rage, had poisoned the woman who stood between her and her ambitions. The crowd murmured, and Aurora felt the weight of their judgment. These people didn't know her. They had no reason to believe her over a beta with diplomatic immunity and a convincing story. But then, Nikolai made a mistake. We were merciful, he said, and there was something ugly beneath his veneer of sorrow. We allowed her to live, hoping that time and reflection would bring her to repentance. But instead, she fled, stealing pack secrets, abandoning her duties, and seeking shelter with your majesty under false pretenses. I am here to bring her home, to face the justice she has so far escaped. Merciful. Tobias's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of thunder. You call what was done to her merciful? Nikolai blinked, apparently unprepared for the ice in the king's tone. Your Majesty? Tobias rose from his throne, and the room seemed to shrink around him. He descended the steps slowly, each footfall deliberate, until he stood before Nikolai with barely a handspan between them. I saw Aurora Valewood the day she arrived in my camp, Tobias said, his voice carrying to every corner of the pavilion. I saw a woman so malnourished that her bones showed through her skin. I saw bruises on her arms, hollows in her cheeks, and a belly that should have been round with child, but was instead concave with starvation. I saw a pregnant woman who had been deliberately, systematically starved until she was too weak to stand. He leaned closer to Nikolai, and his next words were a growl that raised the hair on Aurora's arms. Tell me, Beta Windrider, in what world is that mercy? The silence that followed was absolute. Aurora saw the color drain from Nikolai's face, saw the cracks appear in his careful composure. He had not expected this. He had not expected anyone to care what had been done to her. The Pack Council determined, Nikolai began. I don't give a damn what your Pack Council determined. Tobias's eyes flashed gold, and Aurora felt her wolf respond to the display of power, pressing against her skin with longing. I am not interested in the politics of the Windrider Pack. I am interested in the truth. And the truth, Beta Windrider, is that you came here expecting to find a broken woman, a convenient victim who would cower and confess and make your job easy. But you forgot something. And what is that, Your Majesty? Tobias smiled, and it was not a kind expression. You forgot that she is mine. The words hung in the air, a declaration and a warning and a promise all at once. Aurora felt them resonate through the mate bond, felt Tobias's fierce protectiveness wash over her like a wave. He had called her his, before the court, before Nikolai, before everyone. Aurora Valewood is under my protection, Tobias continued, stepping back and turning to address the crowd. She is innocent until proven guilty, and I have seen no proof. Only accusations and convenient stories. Tomorrow, this tribunal will continue, and Aurora will have the opportunity to present her own account. Until then, she remains in my custody, under my care, and any attempt to remove her from this camp will be considered an act of war against the crown. He turned back to Nikolai, and his voice dropped to something intimate and terrifying. Is that understood, Beta Windrider? Nikolai's jaw clenched, but he nodded. Understood, Your Majesty. Good. You are dismissed. Aurora watched as Nikolai turned and walked toward the exit, his posture stiff with barely contained rage. As he passed her, He paused, leaning close enough that only she could hear his whispered words. This isn't over. You know what you are, Aurora. You know what you did. And when the truth comes out, not even your precious king will be able to save you. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. I know exactly what I am, Nikolai, and I know exactly what you are too. The difference is, I'm not afraid of the truth anymore. Something ugly flickered across his face before he composed himself and strode out of the pavilion. Aurora let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. A warm hand touched her lower back, and she turned to find Tobias beside her, his expression soft with concern. Are you all right? Aurora nodded, though her legs were trembling. I'm fine. Thank you. For what you said. I meant every word. His thumb traced a gentle circle against her spine. Come. You need to eat and rest before tomorrow. He guided her out of the pavilion through a side entrance, away from the curious eyes of the crowd. They walked in silence through the camp until they reached his personal quarters, a tent that was larger and more richly appointed than any she'd seen. You should stay here tonight, Tobias said, holding the flap open for her. It's more secure than your tent, and I'll feel better knowing you're close. Aurora hesitated at the threshold. People will talk. Let them. His eyes held hers, steady and sure. I've already declared you mine before the entire court. I have nothing to hide and nothing to be ashamed of. Do you? She thought about it, really thought about it, and realized that the answer was no. She had done nothing wrong. The shame belonged to Nikolai, to the pack council, to everyone who had stood by while she starved. Not to her. No, she said softly. I don't. She stepped inside. The interior of the tent was warm and richly furnished, with thick rugs covering the ground and tapestries hanging from the walls. A large bed dominated one corner, piled high with furs and blankets. A table in the center held maps and documents, and a small fire burned in a brazier, filling the space with flickering light. Tobias moved to the table and began clearing away the maps, making space for the meal that a servant was already carrying in. Aurora watched him work, struck again by how different he was from Nikolai. Where Nikolai had been all smooth charm and hidden agendas, Tobias was direct, honest, almost disarmingly straightforward. Sit, he said, pulling out a chair for her. You need to eat. Aurora sat, and he settled across from her, watching as she filled her plate. The food was simple, but plentiful. Roasted chicken, fresh vegetables, warm bread with butter. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, still marveling at the novelty of having enough. Tell me about your gift, Tobias said after a long silence. Martha mentioned that you have abilities beyond ordinary healing. Aurora set down her fork, considering how to answer. It's not something I've used in a long time. My mother had it too. She called it truth sight, the ability to read truth in blood. If I draw blood from someone, I can see their memories, their emotions, their intentions. I can project those visions for others to see. She hesitated, then added, My mother also warned me that blood shared between bonded mates leaves echoes, traces that don't fade even when the bond breaks. I've never tested it, but if any of Nikolai's memories transferred to me when we shared blood during our bond, that sounds like a powerful tool. It is. Aurora's voice was quiet. It's also painful, and draining, and dangerous. The more I use it, the more it takes from me. My mother. She broke off, old grief rising in her throat. You don't have to tell me. No, I want to. She met his eyes, drawing strength from the warmth she found there. My mother used her gift to expose a traitor in our pack when I was young. The visions she conjured were undeniable, and the traitor was executed. But the effort cost her. She never fully recovered. She died when I was 12. Tobias's hand covered hers on the table. I'm sorry. I swore after that I would never use my gift unless there was no other choice. It's too dangerous, too costly. Aurora took a deep breath. But tomorrow, I might not have a choice. If Nikolai's lies are convincing enough, if the tribunal believes him over me, they won't. You can't know that. Her voice cracked slightly. You've seen how persuasive he is. He has years of experience manipulating people, twisting words, making himself look innocent. I have nothing but my word and a gift that might kill me if I use it. Tobias rose from his chair and moved around the table to kneel beside her. He took both her hands in his golden eyes burning with intensity. Listen to me, Aurora. You have more than your word. You have the truth, and the truth has a power of its own. You have witnesses, Martha, who saw what they did to you. You have evidence, the state you were in when you arrived here. And you have me. I will not let that male take you. I will not let him hurt you ever again. Do you understand? Aurora felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. Why do you care so much? You barely know me. I know enough. His voice softened. I know that you survived things that would have broken anyone else. I know that you protected your pup with everything you had, even when you had nothing left. I know that you are brave and strong and kind, and that you deserve far more than what life has given you. He lifted one hand to cup her cheek. And I know that you are my mate. My wolf recognized you the moment I saw you, and nothing will change that. Not Nikolai. Not his accusations. Not anything. Aurora leaned into his touch, letting herself feel the comfort he offered. The mate bond hummed between them, warm and steady, and she felt her fear begin to recede. I don't deserve you, she whispered. You deserve everything, he replied, and I intend to spend the rest of my life proving it. He leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead, a gentle benediction. Then he rose and moved to the bed, pulling back the furs. Sleep, he said. I'll keep watch. Tomorrow we face him together. Aurora wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that he needed rest too, but exhaustion was pulling at her, and the bed looked so soft, so safe. She allowed herself to be guided under the covers, and Tobias tucked the furs around her with surprising tenderness. Tobias? She said softly as he moved toward a chair by the fire. Yes? Thank you. For everything. He smiled, and it transformed his stern features into something almost boyish. Thank me after tomorrow, when this is all over. Thank me when I've given you the life you deserve. Aurora closed her eyes, her hand resting on her belly where her pup slumbered peacefully. Tomorrow would bring challenges, dangers, perhaps even pain. But for now, in this moment, she was warm and fed and protected by a male who looked at her like she was precious. For now, that was enough. The morning dawned cold and gray, clouds hanging low over the castle like a shroud. Aurora woke to find Tobias still in the chair by the fire, his watchful gaze alert despite the dark circles beneath his eyes. He had kept his word. He had watched over her through the entire night. You didn't sleep, she said, pushing herself up against the pillows. I'll sleep when this is over. He rose and stretched, his tall frame unfolding with leonine grace. Martha brought breakfast an hour ago. Eat. You'll need your strength. Aurora found that her appetite had fled, replaced by a churning anxiety that made her stomach clench. But she forced herself to eat, knowing he was right. The tribunal would be exhausting, emotionally and physically, and she needed every advantage she could gather. She was halfway through a piece of honeyed bread when the knock came at the door. Martha entered, her face grave, carrying a bundle of deep blue fabric. The Alpha King had this made for you, the old healer said, laying the bundle on the bed. He thought you might want to face the tribunal looking like a queen rather than a refugee. Aurora unfolded the fabric and gasped. It was a gown of midnight blue velvet, embroidered with silver thread in patterns that suggested both healing herbs and wolf tracks. The neckline was modest but elegant, and the cut would accommodate her growing belly without making her look diminished. It was beautiful and thoughtful, and so unexpected that tears pricked at her eyes. He's a good male, Martha said quietly. Better than you know yet. Better than he knows himself. Aurora dressed with Martha's help, the old woman's fingers deft despite their age. When she looked in the mirror, she hardly recognized herself. The hollows in her cheeks had begun to fill out, and the dark circles under her eyes had faded. She still looked thin, still looked fragile, but there was something else there too. A quiet strength that the Windrider pack had tried to starve out of her and failed. "You're ready," Martha said. Aurora wasn't sure that was true, but she was as ready as she would ever be. The great hall was packed when Aurora arrived. Nobles and warriors crowded onto benches along the walls, their whispers dying to silence as she entered on Tobias's arm. She felt their stares like physical weights, felt the judgment in some gazes and the curiosity in others. But she kept her chin high and her steps steady, drawing strength from the mate bond that pulsed warm and reassuring between her and the male at her side. The throne had been replaced with a tribunal table, where 3 figures sat in judgment, Tobias at the center, flanked by his most trusted advisors. Aurora was led to a chair facing the table, positioned so that everyone in the hall could see her. She sat, her hands folded over her belly, and waited. She didn't have to wait long. The doors at the far end of the hall burst open, and Nikolai Windrider strode in like he owned the castle. He was dressed in his finest clothes, his dark hair swept back from his angular face, his smile sharp as broken glass. Behind him came a small retinue of Windrider wolves, their expressions carefully neutral. "Alpha King Tobias," Nikolai said, his voice carrying through the hall with practiced ease. "I thank you for convening this tribunal. I know you must be eager to resolve this unfortunate situation." "I am eager to see justice done," Tobias replied, his voice flat and cold. "Whether that justice favors you remains to be seen." Nikolai's smile flickered, but he recovered quickly. "Of course. Justice. That's all any of us want." He turned, his gaze finding Aurora, and something dark and possessive flickered in his eyes. "Hello, Aurora. You're looking well. Better than you did when you fled our pack like a thief in the night." Aurora said nothing. She didn't trust her voice not to shake. "Let us begin," Tobias said. "Beta Nikolai, you have accused Aurora Valewood of poisoning Luna Sarah, causing her to miscarry the pack heir. You have also accused her of stealing pack secrets. Present your evidence." Nikolai spread his hands in a gesture of false regret. "I wish I had physical evidence to present, Your Majesty." But Aurora was clever. She left no trace of the poison she used. "What I have are witnesses. Wolves who saw her near the Luna's chambers the night before the miscarriage. Wolves who heard her express jealousy over my choice to reject our bond and pursue Sarah instead." "Jealousy?" Aurora couldn't help herself. The word burst out of her, sharp with disbelief. "You think I was jealous?" "Everyone knew you wanted me," Nikolai said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "When I chose Sarah over you, when I publicly rejected our bond, you were devastated, humiliated. You wanted revenge." "I was relieved," Aurora said, and she was surprised to find that it was true. "Relieved to be free of a male who never wanted me, who saw our bond as an inconvenience to be discarded." "Then why did you flee when accused?" Nikolai pressed. "Why run if you had nothing to hide?" "I didn't flee. I was dying." Aurora's voice grew stronger, steadier. "Your pack was starving me, reducing my food until I was too weak to stand, too weak to protect my pup. I collapsed in front of the Alpha King because you were killing me slowly, and everyone in the Windrider pack knew it and did nothing." Murmurs rippled through the hall. Nikolai's expression tightened. "A tragic situation," he said smoothly, "but not evidence of your innocence. The pack believed you guilty. They wanted you punished. They wanted a scapegoat." Aurora rose from her chair, her legs trembling but her voice clear. "They wanted someone to blame for Luna Sarah's miscarriage because they couldn't face the truth." She turned to face the tribunal, to face the watching crowd. "I didn't poison Sarah. I didn't steal any secrets, and I can prove it." Nikolai laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it. "How? With your word against mine? I am a beta of noble blood. You are a lowly pack healer with a dubious reputation and another male's bastard in your belly. She is my mate, Tobias said, his voice like thunder, and you will address her with respect, or I will remove your tongue. The hall went silent. Even Nikolai seemed taken aback by the raw fury in the Alpha King's voice. Aurora drew a deep breath. This was the moment. The choice she had been dreading and preparing for since she first understood what her gift could do, what it would cost her. She thought of her mother, wasting away after exposing a traitor, dying before Aurora was old enough to truly understand the sacrifice she had made. She thought of her pup, the tiny life growing inside her, depending on her to survive this day. And she thought of Tobias, the male who had fed her when she was starving, who had protected her when she was helpless, who had looked at her like she was precious when she felt worthless. She was not weak. She had never been weak. She had simply been waiting for something worth the cost. I have a gift, Aurora said, and her voice carried through the hall like a bell. A gift passed down from my mother, and her mother before her. The ability to read truth in blood, to see memories, emotions, intentions, to project those visions for others to witness. She looked directly at Nikolai, and she saw the first flicker of fear in his dark eyes. If I draw blood from the one who truly poisoned Luna Sarah, everyone in this hall will see the truth. That's absurd, Nikolai said quickly. Blood magic is forbidden, dangerous. You could show us anything, any vision you wanted us to see. Truth sight cannot be faked, Martha's voice rang out from the crowd. I know this gift. I knew Aurora's mother. The visions it creates are drawn directly from the blood. They cannot be altered or manufactured. What the blood shows is truth, pure and undeniable. Nikolai's face had gone pale. I refuse to submit to this. It's barbaric. Then submit to my judgment instead, Tobias said coldly. If you refuse to let truth be drawn from your blood, I will take that as an admission of guilt. You can't. This is a violation of diplomatic protocol. You came here under diplomatic immunity to accuse my mate of murder and theft. Tobias rose from his chair, and his presence seemed to fill the entire hall. You don't get to hide behind protocol when it suits you. You wanted this tribunal. You wanted justice. Here it is. Nikolai's eyes darted around the hall, searching for allies, finding none. The Windrider wolves behind him shuffled uncomfortably, and Aurora saw doubt beginning to bloom on their faces. They had believed their beta, trusted their beta, but now they were watching him sweat and stammer like a cornered animal. I'll do it, Aurora said before Nikolai could find another excuse. I'll draw my own blood first. Let everyone see my memories of that night, my intentions, my innocence. And then, Beta Nikolai, you can do the same. She didn't give him time to object. She pulled a small silver knife from the sleeve of her gown. Martha had pressed it into her hand that morning, knowing what might be needed, and drew the blade across her palm before anyone could stop her. The pain was sharp and bright, but it was nothing compared to what came next. Aurora closed her eyes and reached for her gift, the power that slumbered in her blood like a banked fire. She hadn't used it in years, hadn't dared, but it rose to her call as if it had been waiting, as if it had always known this moment would come. Light blazed from her blood, silver and gold, filling the hall with images that everyone could see. Her memories of that terrible night played out before them. Aurora in her healer's quarters, tending to a sick child, nowhere near the Luna's chambers. Her shock and confusion when the guards came to arrest her. Her terror during the trial, her desperate pleas that fell on deaf ears. The slow starvation that followed, the cruelty of pack members who had once been her friends, the cold satisfaction on Nikolai's face when he visited her cell to tell her that her pup would die along with her gift. And then the light shifted, changed, showed something Aurora hadn't expected. Something she hadn't known her blood contained, a memory not her own. The echo her mother had warned her about, a trace that had transferred when she and Nikolai shared blood during their brief, broken bond, and had lingered in her veins ever since. Nikolai, slipping into the Luna's chambers while Sarah slept. Nikolai, adding drops of wolfsbane to her evening tea. Nikolai, smoothing the covers around her with gentle hands while poison spread through her body toward the pup she carried. The vision was damning and undeniable. Every face in the hall could see it. Nikolai's careful precision, Nikolai's cold calculation, Nikolai's complete lack of remorse. No, Nikolai breathed. That's a trick. She's manipulating. Silence! Tobias's voice shook the rafters. We have all seen the truth. You poisoned your own Luna. You killed your own pack's heir. And then you blamed an innocent woman, condemned her to death by starvation, all to hide your crime. Nikolai's composure shattered completely. His face twisted with desperate rage, and he lunged toward Aurora, shifting mid-stride, his wolf form erupting in a blur of dark fur and snapping teeth. Someone screamed. Guards moved to intercept, but Nikolai was fast, faster than anyone expected, driven by the desperation of a cornered animal. Aurora didn't run. She stood her ground as he hurtled toward her, and she did something she had never done before. She pushed her gift outward, not to read blood, but to command it. Nikolai's wolf form crumpled mid-leap, his body twisting as the blood in his veins turned sluggish and heavy. He crashed to the floor at Aurora's feet, whimpering, unable to move, unable to shift back. Aurora looked down at him, and she felt nothing but cold clarity. You broke our bond when you starved my child, she said, her voice steady as stone. The moon goddess answered, You have no claim on me, Nikolai. You never did. Tobias's guards seized the fallen beta, dragging him upright, forcing him back into human form. Nikolai's face was gray with pain and fear, all his smooth charm stripped away, leaving only the ugly truth beneath. Aurora, please, he gasped. We had something. The bond. You felt it too. We could... The bond was a chain you used to control me, Aurora said. I'm glad it's gone. Tobias stepped forward, and his presence radiated authority and deadly calm. Beta Nikolai Windrider, you are guilty of murder, treason, and conspiracy. You poisoned your pack's Luna. You killed your pack's heir. You condemned an innocent woman to death. For these crimes, I sentence you to execution. The sentence will be carried out immediately. Nikolai opened his mouth to protest, to plead, to bargain. But Tobias's guards were already dragging him toward the door, and his screams echoed through the hall. Wordless, animal, utterly defeated. Aurora watched him go. She watched until the doors closed behind him, until his screams faded into silence, until the tension in the hall finally began to ease. Then her legs gave out, and she would have fallen if Tobias hadn't been there to catch her. I've got you, he murmured against her hair, lifting her easily in his arms. I've got you. It's over. She pressed her face to his chest and let herself shake. The rest of that day passed in a blur. Aurora was carried back to their chambers, where Martha tended to her palm and forced her to eat and rest. The tribunal officially dissolved, the Windrider contingent departed in shame, and word spread through the kingdom that the Alpha King's mate had exposed a murderer using blood magic that could not lie. Martha brought news later that Luna Sarah had collapsed when the visions revealed Nikolai's treachery. She had truly believed Aurora guilty, had truly mourned her lost pup without knowing her own mate had murdered their child. The pack was arranging for her care, but whether she would ever recover from the betrayal remained uncertain. When evening came, Tobias found her standing by the window, watching the last light fade from the sky. How are you feeling? He asked, coming to stand beside her. Exhausted, she admitted, but also lighter. Like a weight I've been carrying for months has finally been lifted. He turned her to face him, those molten amber eyes searching hers. You were magnificent today. I've never seen anything like it. You stood before an entire kingdom and demanded truth, and when he attacked you, you stopped him with nothing but your will. I didn't know I could do that, Aurora confessed. The blood command. I've never done it before. You're stronger than you know, stronger than anyone knows. His hands came up to cup her face, infinitely gentle despite their size. Aurora, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Her heart began to race. What is it? Tonight, when the moon rises, I want to mark you. I want to make you mine in every way that matters, to complete our bond so that nothing can ever separate us again. His voice was rough with emotion, with barely restrained need. But I won't do it unless you want it too. Unless you're ready. I know you've been through hell. I know you have every reason to be afraid of bonds and males who claim to want you. So I'm asking, do you want this? Do you want me? Aurora looked up at him. This male who had saved her, protected her, believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. This male who had fed her when she was starving and declared her pup his own when he had no obligation to do either. This male whose presence made her feel safe and warm and whole for the first time in her life. Yes, she whispered. I want this. I want you. I've wanted you since the moment our eyes met in that tent, when my wolf woke up after months of silence and howled your name. Something fierce and triumphant blazed in his golden eyes. He lowered his head and kissed her, and it was nothing like the gentle press of lips to forehead he had given her before. This kiss was consuming, claiming, a declaration of intent that left her breathless and trembling. When he finally pulled back, they were both panting. Bed, he growled. Now! He carried her there, laying her down on the furs with reverent care despite the hunger burning in his eyes. His hands shook as he removed her gown, revealing her body inch by inch, worshipping each newly exposed patch of skin with his lips. When he came to her swollen belly, he pressed a tender kiss there, and Aurora felt tears slip down her cheeks. This pup is mine, he said against her skin, not by blood, but by choice, by love. I will raise her as my daughter, protect her as my heir, and the moon goddess herself couldn't stop me. Her? Aurora asked, her voice breaking. I can feel her through the bond. A daughter. Strong and fierce like her mother. He looked up at Aurora, his eyes soft. Is that all right? Yes, Aurora breathed. Yes, that's perfect. He rose over her then, his body covering hers, his weight a comfort rather than a threat. She could feel the heat of him, the barely contained power, and she wasn't afraid. She had never felt less afraid in her life. This will hurt, he warned, his lips brushing the junction of her neck and shoulder, the marking bite. But only for a moment, and then, I know, she said. I'm ready. His teeth sank into her flesh, and the pain was bright and sharp and immediate. But almost before she could register it, something else flooded through her. Heat and light and overwhelming sensation, the mate bond snapping fully into place like a door flying open. She could feel him now, feel everything he felt, his fierce joy, his protective rage, his bone-deep relief that she was finally, truly his. And beneath it all, love. A love so vast and encompassing that it made her gasp, that filled every hollow place inside her, that warmed the parts of her soul she had thought frozen forever. He released her neck, lapping at the wound until it closed, and looked down at her with molten eyes. Your turn, he said, tilting his head to bare his throat. Mark me, Aurora. Make me yours. She didn't hesitate. She rose up and sank her teeth into the same spot on his neck, and she felt the bond complete itself, felt their souls weave together into something unbreakable, something eternal. His blood was hot on her tongue, and through it she could taste his essence, his power, his absolute certainty that she was his, and he was hers, and nothing would ever change that. Mine, she breathed against his skin. Yours, he answered, pulling her close. Mate, they said together. And from deep within her belly, Aurora felt her daughter kick, a tiny, joyful response to the bond settling around them all, binding them together as a family. They held each other for a long time after that, wrapped in furs and warmth and the newly settled bond. Aurora pressed her face to Tobias's chest and listened to his heartbeat, steady and strong, and felt peace wash over her like a tide. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "Now you heal. You rest. You eat until that hollow look finally leaves your eyes forever." He stroked her hair, his touch impossibly gentle. "And in a few days, when you're ready, we announce our mating to the kingdom. You'll be crowned Luna Queen. Our daughter will be recognized as princess and heir." And the Windrider pack? They've sent word already. Elder Hendrix has taken over as interim alpha, and he's offering tribute and formal apology for their treatment of you. They didn't know about Nikolai's treachery, but they knew they were starving a pregnant healer, and they did nothing. "They'll have to earn your forgiveness." Aurora considered this. Part of her wanted to reject any apology, to condemn the entire pack for standing by while she suffered. But a larger part of her was simply tired of carrying anger. "They can earn it," she said finally. "I won't make it easy, but I won't close the door entirely." "That's more than they deserve." Tobias pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You're a better person than I am. I would have burned them to the ground." "No, you wouldn't." Aurora smiled against his chest. "You're not the monster you pretend to be, Tobias Ashford. I've seen your heart. It's the gentlest thing I've ever known." He made a sound that was half laugh, half protest. "Don't let anyone else hear you say that. I have a reputation to maintain. Your secret is safe with me." They drifted into sleep tangled together, the bond humming between them, warm and settled and complete. The coronation took place 3 weeks later, when Aurora had finally gained back enough weight that she no longer looked like a strong wind might break her. The ceremony was grand and glittering, the great hall filled with nobles from a dozen packs, all eager to see the new Luna Queen. Aurora stood beside Tobias as the crown was placed on her head, a delicate circlet of silver and moonstone that caught the light with every movement. Her gown was white and gold, her belly proudly displayed rather than hidden. Her daughter would be born in 2 months, and she wanted everyone to know it. "All hail Luna Queen Aurora," the officiant proclaimed. "Long may she reign beside our Alpha King." The hall erupted in cheers. Aurora looked out at the sea of faces and felt something she had never expected to feel again: hope. Later, at the feast that followed, Tobias made a point of personally loading Aurora's plate with delicacies until it was overflowing. "The table never empties for my Luna," he said, echoing the words he had spoken that first night in the war tent. Aurora felt tears prick at her eyes. "I remember. I'll say it every day for the rest of our lives if I need to." He took her hand, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "You will never go hungry again, Aurora. You will never feel unwanted or worthless or alone. I swear it on the moon and the stars and every breath in my body." She believed him. For the first time in her life, she believed without reservation that someone meant exactly what they said. Around them, the feast continued. Laughter and music and the warmth of a kingdom celebrating its new queen. Martha was there, beaming with pride, taking credit for everything. The Windrider contingent sat in a corner, looking properly chastened, their tribute offerings piled high at the foot of the throne. And in Aurora's belly, her daughter kicked and rolled, as if she too knew that everything had changed, that she would be born into a world of safety and love and endless abundance. When the feast finally ended and Aurora and Tobias retired to their chambers, she stood again by the window, looking out at the moon. "What are you thinking?" Tobias asked, coming to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her, his hands resting on her belly. "I'm thinking about my mother," Aurora said softly. "She used her gift to expose a traitor, and it cost her everything. I thought if I ever used mine, it would cost me the same. But it didn't. No. It gave me everything instead." She turned in his arms, looking up at the male who had become her whole world. "It gave me you. It gave me this. A home. A family. A future I never dared to dream of. You deserve all of it." He kissed her forehead, her cheek, her lips. "You deserve more than I could ever give you. but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying." Aurora smiled, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, the smile reached all the way to her soul. "I love you," she said, and the words felt like coming home. "I love you too." His arms tightened around her. "My mate, my queen, my everything." Outside, the moon shone silver and bright over a kingdom at peace, and in the Alpha King's chambers, a starving healer who had become a queen slept safe in the arms of her mate, dreaming of the daughter who would be born into love and the future that stretched before them, bright and boundless as the sky. The table would never empty, the bond would never break. And Aurora Valewood, Luna Queen of the Realm, would never be hungry again.